this is part 1B. If you haven't seen part A, please do that first, because this is a continuation about China lied and people died with Sarah. She just wants to go by her first name, and I can understand why. And so please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And if you have any questions below, please let us know, and enjoy the episode of part 1B. Thanks. So, but moving on, you seem to hold a lot of contention on the Western media for the way they reported the CCP virus in China. Can you explain a little on that?
Yes. So first off, with elation, when the United States allegedly surpassed China's numbers, blue check marks all over Twitter were, shouting it from the rooftops that, we're the worst country now and we have surpassed China. When obviously we all know China's numbers are not real. So why are you even repeating China's numbers without, a giant eye roll or just a little caveat that says, here's China's figures, which are obviously not real. I have a quote here from sporadically. Sometimes the media will, they'll tell the truth and admit that China lies about this stuff. Here's a quote from Fareed Zakaria. Yes, China engaged in a cover-up, and yes, China's repressive regime has always controlled and manipulated information. He then followed up that statement going on a tangent about why Trump is so awful. Why isn't there more emphasis on this? Why isn't there more emphasis on, we can't believe any of these numbers. They have halted any investigation at every single opportunity. But nevertheless, the narrative remains America's doing the worst and, China's all right. There's also
that kind of reminds me. That kind of reminds me, Sarah, of what I've heard in the past about how America has more people incarcerated or in prison versus what the people anywhere around the world. And I know with China's black jails, the hidden jails and the prisoners,
So
that number we can't be worse than China, who has all these political prisoners or these people who have, want their freedom, or people who have, faith or different reasons are being persecuted. It's just
there's 1 million Muslims in jail in China. That's just the Muslims that they're putting in jail there.
Oh yeah, the Uyghurs.
The Uyghur Muslims, yeah. You then have regular jails
from
where
Turkey.
Dissidents or just your regular criminals, and then they have what is called black jails, which are basically jails off the books. And a lot of these places, that's where they'll get a lot of slave labor out of them. So this is where you're getting a lot of your cheap goods. But you never hear anything about that in the Western media. They also have
Laogai, the slave laborer. The Laogai slave labor. That's what it's called.
There's also this. They have this. The media will have this odd reverence for China when they do something. So once the outbreak occurred and they built that hospital in 10 days to kind of accommodate for the excessive amount of patients that they would have to treat. The media was, look at China. They built this hospital in 10 days. Okay, what they built is equivalent to what the Red Cross would build in a war zone. Okay, it's just last minute, bare minimum what we have to do to help people. Right. But the media acted like they just built the Mayo Clinic in 10 days. It was like, this is not. This is just this is a makeshift hospital, which by the way has since flooded. So I don't know what's so impressive about that.
The earthquake that happened, when was it, in 2008? Whatever, all the children's buildings fell down and a lot of children died back in, what was that city called? Starts with the S, where there's spicy food. Sichuan, where a lot of kids died because the building was not made safe for earthquakes and stuff like that. So that's the first thing that was that I was thinking about. When I was reading those articles.
I will get to Google right after this. I had not heard about that.
Well, it's really sad that these children, back then it was only one child policy, and their child died, in school because these buildings weren't made for earthquakes, to take earthquakes. They were they were built poorly. But yeah, so it's just all like to show, it's all for show. I think we're going to be talking more about that later, but
They
yeah,
do get
it
built.
was odd that they reported that in the news, I think.
Yeah, they do build very quickly there. But one of my favorite China resources is a guy that runs a podcast, and he actually bought property in China, and he said it's basically, they bought it, first ones to move in, freshly built, and it was just falling to pieces within the first year. So that, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
And that's firsthand experience. That's not from some sort of reporter behind a desk, Right. Wow. Wasn't Radio Free Asia had something mentioning?
Yes. So, like, in reference to,
that directly contradicts the numbers.
Mm-hmm. So, in reference
back
to
the Western media, because we're kind of going off track.
So, for China's dodgy figures, there is some information that comes out now from other sources that that is contradicting their numbers. So, Radio Free Asia reported that between March 23rd and April 5th, 42,000 urns were distributed. This is just in Wuhan, and Wuhan residents were reporting that the incinerators were being used around the clock. So there's one part that indicates, obviously, the numbers. It is, but I mean, I haven't seen that on MSNBC or CNN. And
right.
then
I mean, why wouldn't they even say that? Why wouldn't they even cover that? Yeah, go ahead. Please, go ahead.
Yeah. There was also a report that came out that there's 3 cell phone providers in China. They're all state-run. All 3 reported a drop in users. The total is 21 million cell phone users were dropped. I think it was from January to March.
I think my heart just dropped when you said that. It's just like, I mean, it just hits you so hard. You think about those numbers. I mean, you don't really know because of the way things are handled. We haven't been able to go in there, like you said earlier. We haven't been able to even go in there. Nobody can know what's going on in China, even with these black jails that we were talking about earlier, much less what's going on with this virus that's affecting all of us right now. My heart just dropped when you said that. It's just, we have to go by these numbers, and we really don't know. So sad.
Yeah, that's a startling number, and I'm not saying 21 million people have definitely died. Some of the excuses I've heard for this is that a lot of Chinese people have 2 phones, so they'll have like their personal phone, and then they have one for a small business. So one of the excuses is that, because the economy was shut down, much like what we have in the West, that people were just canceling their business phone contracts. That could legitimately be it. I can't think of any other sort of plausible explanation, but 21 million, I mean, that's sort of great leap forward kind of death tolls. But, China is a giant hermit kingdom, and there's never any explanation for this stuff, so your mind immediately goes to the worst possible place.
Yeah, that's what my heart did. But even before that, there was a study back in March, I think it was March 13th, that Southampton made that said majority of the spread could have been prevented. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Are you aware of that study?
Yeah. University of Southampton in England. And they basically found that had China acted 3 weeks earlier, then the caseloads would have been reduced by 95%. If they had acted just 2 weeks earlier, it would have been a reduction by 86%, and 1 week earlier would have been 66%. So a lot of people could have been saved.
Now, what's your understanding? Like 1 week, what are your thoughts when you read that? Because my mind can't really.
I'm just kind of thinking about it in the sense that, like, okay, if one person has it and they can infect like 12 people, then
Right.
had they, quarantined more people, then that single person maybe would have infected like one person or two people as opposed to 12.
Yeah, and then when you're like just really right on top of each other, and inside the buildings, even the vents,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was picturing at one time. But after this, that continued to spread like that because they didn't prevent it, it's just really, really enormously sad. Go
In
ahead, please.
reference to sort of quarantining people,
Yeah.
China did, shut down all of Wuhan, but the biggest problem is that they didn't stop residents from Wuhan from leaving to go to another country. They quarantined them so they couldn't go to Beijing, they couldn't go to Shanghai, they couldn't infect the rest of China, but they didn't care that they were going to go to Italy or Spain or any other countries. It's just a total disregard for human life everywhere. And again, there's just no one in the media just talking about this blatant disregard for human life. The last bit is what's happening now in China is this really horrible treatment of foreigners that live there, because China is trying to basically say that any new cases in China now are totally the fault of foreigners that have come in. So foreigners are being denied entry into certain places of business, and the people being treated, yeah, but the worst treated are the North Africans, and we've seen videos of them just straight up Chinese police forces going to their apartments, kicking them out. They're wandering the streets. Which doesn't really even make any sense. If you think these people are the culprit for bringing the virus into the country, why are you letting them roam the streets? Why wouldn't you keep them isolated in their apartment? In some cases, I've seen that some Africans are being isolated in their apartment. But I've seen other times where they're just taking them out of the housing and then letting them roam the streets, which is, if it doesn't make any sense.
Two extremes and too weird. I mean, I know that they always were a little bit, because of the Communist Party's speeches on how the Communist Party is basically, they can't live without the Communist Party. There's no division between Chinese people and the Communist Party. So if Chinese Communist Party is the first and most powerful, everything else is less than. And they've had so the according to them, I think it's like the white people, since we have, sometimes money or something like that, we're a little bit higher, and then the black people, to them, they're considered poor, whatever, and they were racist. Would you agree with that in general, like overall in the past?
Yeah, to an extent, they have their same sort of hierarchy that the left likes to have. But in general, I will give this to China. It's not so much of a race aspect as far as you are just not Chinese. For the Chinese Communist Party and sort of what they propagate through state media is that it's China versus the world. So they will treat any foreigners poorly. But that's sort of, the level of that is going to depend kind of where you are. Like in Shanghai is that's the wealthiest city, and it's also the most welcoming to foreigners. That's where you'll find most of the foreigners living. So they're probably not going to be treated as poorly. But in general, it's really just a China versus the world, because I've heard stories of, a white British woman on a train, and this is during rush hour, and she alleges that everyone in the train left, so she has a whole carriage to herself, and that people are also screaming at her, a dirty American virus or dirty foreign virus or something. So they're treating everyone terribly. But the bulk of the videos I have seen, which have just been really sad, is just when they're kicking out the North Africans and, basically taking their homes away. I'd rather be yelled at on the subway than kicked out of my house.
Wraps up part 1B, if you can believe. I'm having a hard time believing that I have this YouTube channel, whatever this is. I have made a podcast and now I'm in video, and I'm just like, what? My face is too close. Technology is just all new. So Please let me know any other comments that you might have or any thoughts and questions about the actual content as I learn how to do this with the technology and trying to read the screen without using glasses. But anyway, don't forget to please to hit like and subscribe for more great content. We will have a part C in this episode, China Lied, People Died by Sarah. And until next time, take care.